Welcome back to another episode of the Sober Minded Show. A lot of things have happened in the past couple weeks, so there is sort of a lot to cover. A lot of it has already been talked about, so I'm not really going to say too much about it. But there were a couple of things that happened and a couple of updates here and there about those things. So I'm going to start out with each of those and move on to a broader topic, basically using recent events to talk about a larger subject that isn't really talked about, especially from the Christian community. We'll just go ahead and get started. So this is from a couple of weeks ago already. There was a shooting at a Catholic school in Minneapolis, and you've probably heard this already. And I believe there was 3 that were critically injured. 2 of them died. And it just came out yesterday that one of them is actually making a recovery. So they were in an acute care facility, and they just made it to therapy. And it was a 7th grade girl, age 12, who was shot in the head, and she survived. Now she's moving on to therapy from that. So that's pretty miraculous that that's happening. And that was just an update from yesterday. And it seems 2 other girls, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, died. 15 more children were injured. The shooter was a 23-year-old. His mother had worked at the same school, and he himself attended the school before graduating in 2017. And if you read the Wikipedia article, it says that he was assigned male at birth and had at one point identified as transgender, legally changed his name in 2019. And the article points out there's no evidence that he had begun receiving gender-affirming care or hormone replacement therapy. So basically, this guy had a track record prior to the shooting of being mentally ill. They had expressed violent thoughts. They drew a layout of the school, which is also connected to a church, it seems like. And he wrote things on the guns and on the magazines of the guns. The article says these messages included anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, and racist phrases. I don't even know if I can say that. One of the phrases referring to Donald Trump, of course. Another one referring to the Holocaust, which is interesting. Kind of seems like this person was attacking kind of left talking points and right talking points. That's when you know the person doesn't really have, there's not really a clear motive for this shooting other than somebody who is mentally unstable and latches on to anything that's violent or extreme just to get a reaction. There are a lot of people like that. They don't have any morals or values that they stick to. They just kind of pick and choose things that are very inflammatory. They don't really have a reason for it. So that's a little bit about the shooter. Take note that they were transgender. Now moving on to the second story that happened. Also happened a few weeks ago, last month. There was a stabbing on a subway in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this was a black man. Again, history of mental illness. So this doesn't really have anything to do with being transgender or LGBT. But this man was mentally ill, and he had a track record of that. And he stabbed and killed a 23-year-old woman. One thing I want to point out before I go further into this, the weapon here was not a gun. It was a knife. And a lot of people like to bring up with gun violence or shootings, they say, here's proof that we need to ban guns or put more restrictions on guns. There are a lot of subway stabbings. There's a lot of knife attacks. So what are you going to do with knives? You're going to ban knives or restrict knives? It's a ridiculous argument. You're not going to stop violence by limiting the weapons. And you probably heard this before. Most of the time, these people that aren't even supposed to have weapons, they're still able to get them because they sneak past. There's these people that aren't allowed to have weapons or firearms, they're still able to get them through criminal activity. So regardless of whether there's laws in place or not, they're already circumventing the laws and regulations anyway. So it doesn't matter if there's restrictions or if there's a banning on firearms. You're not going to stop the criminals from doing criminal things. So it's a very ridiculous argument, and especially in places that use public transit a lot. So for example, in New York, there's an article that says that there's been about a 53% increase in subway stabbings, and that's in New York alone. Seems like it's still a pretty big problem. And in this particular case, with the stabbing in Charlotte, the perpetrator had a track record of mental illness and primarily schizophrenia. They spoke to his sister, and his sister said that he heard voices in his head. And according to the perpetrator himself, he said that the woman he stabbed was reading his mind. So that already shows you this guy was not mentally well, and he was really unfit to be in public. So there was a lot of problems that happened prior to this that led up to an even bigger problem now. That's the case with a lot of these situations. And that's the case with a lot of these situations. Now moving on to the final big event that happened in regards to violence or murder. It was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. There's already been a lot of people who have said things about this. I'll briefly give my perspective on the issue. I remember Charlie Kirk back in 2016 when he was sort of early on in his career, and he was advocating for Donald Trump. And it was a very optimistic time for a lot of people, a lot of conservatives, a lot of young men and women making videos about Trump and conservatism, making a comeback. And it was a very optimistic time. It was a really fun time. That was the first time I really paid attention to politics. I was about 18 years old. But it was really like this movement, and it sounds kind of cliche, but it was kind of cool to feel like you're a part of this movement. You're seeing these young people like Charlie Kirk who are talking about the positives of being conservative. That's what Turning Point USA was really about, going to the universities. And even Jordan Peterson as well was a part of that. And then there was a lot of videos about like owning liberals, and Ben Shapiro owns transgender in a debate. Those were really popular at the time. And then of course Trump, his debates and all the clips that were being popular at the time, the back and forth between him and the media. And then he finally gets elected, and it was like this high. It just continued, and there was a good feeling about it too. And then COVID happened, Biden happened, everything started to unravel, and people changed like during COVID. Like these speakers that I mentioned before, people started changing. They weren't so unified anymore, and the issue just got worse. But in regards to Charlie Kirk, he was one of those guys who really promoted the gospel as well as his political messages, which is a good move. Not a lot of conservative people would do that. There was a certain point where I didn't really follow him as much as I did previously, just because, like I said, the conservative base really got fractured, and there just wasn't enough time to really pay attention to everyone. So when he was shot, my initial reaction was like it didn't feel real. Yeah, it didn't feel real at first, and I was thinking, because I just heard that he was shot, didn't know he was dead, or didn't really think that he was going to be dead. I thought, well, he's Trump survived, he's gonna survive too. But that wasn't the case. We found out pretty soon after he was shot, and I hadn't seen the video, so that's why I thought like there might be a chance. But again, that wasn't the case. Now the fallout that's been happening after, there's been a back and forth, of course, between leftists and the right, and people making fun of people who have always made fun of Charlie Kirk, and people saying good riddance to him and things like that. And the people that say things like that lean on the younger side. And they're really brainwashed, and they bought into the dehumanization of their political opponents. They know very little about Charlie Kirk. The things that people point out the most about him, at least coming from the side that hates him, they always bring up what he said about LGBTQ and transgenderism. And the irony in all of this is that, they say good riddance, and they say all these awful things about him, and they claim, well, it's freedom of speech. But what about the freedom of speech for Charlie Kirk? If they really wanted freedom of speech, it's logical to also have the freedom of not being shot for your opinions. And that really shows the hypocrisy of the left. And for the young people that are saying these awful things, they're certainly misguided. They're certainly, they're just not mature. They're immature. They don't really understand life. They haven't really developed a sense of values or morality or what's important in life. And you see that with the shooters as well. A lot of them lean towards the younger side, especially in terms of school shootings in their early 20s or 17, 18. For example, with the Columbine shooting, they were 17 and 18 in that one. But there's sort of two things going on here, and this is where I get into the larger subject that I wanted to talk about, which is youth and mental illness. The Charlie Kirk shooter was 22. He had a transgender boyfriend, so I'm assuming that means that it was somebody born female who is identifying as a male. But in another article, it says that the shooter has, and the roommate is transgender and transitioning from man to woman. So maybe one of the articles is misgendering whatever. The key word there is transgender. That doesn't really matter, because right away from that, somebody who's willing to be a romantic partner to somebody who is transgender, this even goes for any LGBTQ or whatever, you basically have to be mentally ill. You got to be crazy, a mental discrepancy to think that it is acceptable for you to be in a relationship with someone of the same gender or somebody who is transgender. And a lot of young people are a part of that. And so that's why it's very easily to sway them with certain ideologies. And it's basically the fault of their parents for not giving them a clear path to follow. Now, sometimes that is the case where parents can be very strict, the children rebel and fall into some pretty bad things as they grow up. But most of the time, parents say, as long as my son or daughter is happy, then I'm okay. Well, the things that make your son or daughter happy can sometimes be very evil and harmful. Somebody's exposed to LGBT ideology, and then paired with that, they have a mental illness, or they have a capacity for a mental illness. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's due to previous trauma. In any case, those two things go hand in hand a lot, because they wouldn't be accepting of transgenderism or LGBTism if they didn't have a mental discrepancy, or if they weren't fully mentally developed. That's why they fall into those things, and then it just compounds the problem even more. So that's why there's a lot of transgender shooters. That's why there's a lot of mentally ill shooters. There are other attacks that we've seen in the past that don't involve guns. They don't involve firearms, but they still involve violent people, mentally ill people who should not be out in public and who have a track record of doing violent things and of being a general nuisance to the public. So this sort of bleeds into now figuring out a solution to that is pretty difficult, because it is a complicated situation. Whose job is it to take care of these mentally ill people? Could say it's the government. The government could provide some care for mentally ill people. For example, we used to have insane asylums, but now all those people that would be in an insane asylum are now out in public. They just let them out, walk free among people who are normal. So that is one thing that maybe needs to be brought back. Help coming from the government is fine, but the biggest problem is when these people show a track record of being violent and they allow them to be free among other people. That's where these situations come from. Clearly, none of these people are earnestly attending church. They're not earnestly pursuing a right relationship with God. So of course, they basically don't understand anything other than evil and hatred. They have no concept of what is good other than what they want. They think that what they want is good, but they don't want good things. They want evil. They want to hurt people. They want to be violent. And so of course, that's the conclusion to a godless society. You're going to have a lot of mentally ill people walking around doing evil things. Now, that's not to say all mentally ill people are evil, and some mentally ill people are really chill and they don't bother anyone. But there does have to be a certain level of carefulness, because again, you never know. They're mentally ill for a reason, and that means they don't have the normal capacity as regular people. Their conscience doesn't regulate their actions. There's a certain level of caution that has to be taken there. Moving on to the next thing, though, sort of related to the Charlie Kirk shooting, but there was someone who made a comment about it, and that person was a famous TV show host, of course, talking about Jimmy Kimmel. And basically what Jimmy Kimmel said was the MAGA gang is trying to score political points from the shooting. The MAGA gang was desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and trying to score political points from it. So basically saying that the shooter was also a Republican conservative, part of the MAGA gang, according to him. Further on, he said that Donald Trump was mourning over Charlie Kirk like a 4-year-old mourns over a goldfish. So he's trying to paint this picture that Trump doesn't really care about Charlie Kirk, and by extension, he doesn't really care about his own voters. He's just trying to score political points, I guess. Doesn't really make sense when you think about it. Of course, there was negative reaction. There was backlash, and he was removed from his show. His show was taken off for a week, I think. Incredibly ironic that the left was crying about one of their own being canceled. They were canceling people on the right. They were canceling brands and labels. Remember, Aunt Jemima? The left was all about canceling. And now finally, they get a taste of their own medicine and they don't like it. So very ironic. And lots of leftists came out saying that the cancellation was unwarranted. What he said was free speech, not hate speech. Well, who determines what's free speech and what's hate speech? It's sort of this nebulous definition that pretty much warp into whatever they want depending on the situation. And then Trump said that it was a good thing that he was taken off the air. The people are directing their ire to the right, but whose decision was it to take his show off? It was ABC. It was the network that employed Jimmy Kimmel. Do they really think that ABC was scared from the right? Or that the right was like threatening them, like, you better take down Jimmy Kimmel's show or else something's going to happen to ABC? That's really hard to believe. There were people saying, if ABC was smart enough, they know that they have to take down a show, so on and so forth. But I don't think there was ever a big push to have specifically ABC, to have them take down Jimmy Kimmel's show. It really does seem sort of orchestrated. They should be saying, ABC, you have no spine, you have no backbone. If you really cared about freedom of speech in America, you would leave Jimmy Kimmel's show up. Why don't they release the threats? Where's the threats that they supposedly received to take Jimmy Kimmel's show off? Show me the conservatives that threatened ABC. It doesn't exist because it never happened. Personally, it seems very obvious that this is just a ploy. It's a plot from ABC to manufacture this story that Jimmy Kimmel is kind of this hero who he stood up to the evil conservatives that tried to take him down, to deplatform him and cancel him. Again, even though the left was doing that for so long prior, and they still continue to do that, and they're following that story, they're following their plot, because a week later Jimmy Kimmel came back anyway. So much for being canceled or taken off air. If ABC really felt threatened, they would have taken him off for a few weeks. They would have been really scared from the big bad conservatives threatening them. No, he came back a week later, like nothing happened in the first place, because nothing did happen. And then when Jimmy Kimmel came back, he was touted as a hero, and people were saying Jimmy Kimmel standing up to the conservatives, the right, whatever. And there was a phrase that they kept repeating, leftist media kept repeating, when they announced that he was going to return. The people were saying, when he comes back, this is a pivotal moment. And here's the clip here. And this was from his show. So you see the way they're hyping this up. And it wasn't the right. You saw what Fox News said about him. But the left, ABC, NBC, CNN, they all received the same script to say, this is going to be an important moment in history. It's going to be a pivotal moment in broadcast history. So you can definitely see that there was a script sent out. You can see that there's a play-by-play that they were given. But watch this.
Jimmy Kimmel and autism.
Jimmy Kimmel coming back to late night television.
ABC chose to bring back their low-rating nighttime host.
We are in for a monologue that will be a marker in late night show history.
It's going to be in a moment.
Yeah, no question. A huge moment in American history.
It's one of the most pivotal moments in broadcast history.
He will be delivering what is being dubbed the most anticipated monologue in late night in years.
Maybe we should change? Yeah.
It's a joke. It's all a joke to him. He's got this stupid costume on. He's got his token Hispanic co-host dressed up as a banana. First of all, it's not funny. Second of all, he's not taking this seriously. If he really cared, he might have showed a little bit more respect. But it's all funny. It's all for laughs. You got the people cheering. Now he comes out, and I'll read you some of the quotes of what he said. The show is not important. What is important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this. Most of all, I want to thank the people who don't support my show and what I believe, but support my right to share those beliefs anyway. I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it is never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. Really, Jimmy, you really want us to believe that? But he goes on, nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what. It was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. There was that was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. Yeah, right, man. Give me a break. Later in the monologue, Kimmel hit out against Trump, saying the president did his best to cancel me, but that instead he forced millions of people to watch the show. Again, planned from ABC. Kimmel added that the president of the United States made it very clear he wants to see me and the hundreds of people who work here fired from our jobs. Our leader celebrates Americans losing their livelihoods because he can't take a joke. Then he goes on, one thing I did learn from Lenny Bruce and George... Okay, so this is interesting. First of all, let me back up a little bit to address one of the things he said before. So the president of the United States made it very clear. So he's trying to paint Trump as this cancel culture demon. Again, the irony is so thick here. But then he goes on to say, one thing I learned from Lenny Bruce and George Carlin. So Lenny Bruce was a comedian from the 60s or 70s, I think. He was one of the first really controversial comedians, in particular with race and with women. George Carlin, the interesting thing about George Carlin, he started out as a family-friendly comedian, but then he became more satirical on society and conservative values. He made fun of leftist ideology here and there, but really he was just a dumb boomer liberal. He was an atheist. He bashed Christians as well. And Howard Stern is a very gross kind of person. So it's interesting that he's bringing up these three, and especially with Lenny Bruce. I mean, Lenny Bruce, he was a white, I think Italian guy. He would say the N-word, like fool, the full word, the full N-word. Well, if people like Lenny Bruce were still around, he would definitely go after them and get them canceled. He would want them canceled for sure. So it just increases the irony here. But anyways, he says one thing is that a government threat to silence a comedian the president doesn't like is anti-American, even though he would do the same and the people that watch his show would do the same in a heartbeat. They would do it. They have done it. They would cancel and witch hunt people for telling jokes. And then, of course, he ends his monologue. He says, Erica, Kirk, Charlie Kirk's wife, forgave the man who shot her husband. He says, that is an example we should follow. So there, he has to throw that in to make it seem like he's in the middle to, kind of please both sides. And then he goes on, it touched me deeply, he added. And if there's anything we should take from this tragedy to carry forward, I hope it can be that, not this. Let's all be forgiving, basically. He's saying, forgive me. Who cares about the hypocrisy? Who cares about the lying? Who cares about the plans going on behind the scenes? Everybody just forgive me. Forgive Jimmy. Guys, forgive Jimmy. He's got so much money. He's got so many possessions. He's got so much popularity. He's so famous. He's this cool, funny, relatable TV show host. Guys, just forgive him. It's very ridiculous, hypocritical. What else do you expect from people with no values, no morals? Only thing they care about is self-gain. What can they get out of it? That's exactly what Jimmy Kimmel's doing. And that concludes this episode of the show. I said everything I needed to say. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.